In the distant future, humanity had joined the Galactic Concord, an alliance of different alien species that spanned countless worlds. The Concord was meant to bring peace and cooperation among the stars, but as Emma Carter was about to learn, not all species treated humans as equals. Emma, a young human diplomat, stood in the Grand Galactic Tribunal on Jern Prime. The alien world was massive, with towering structures made of glass and metal that seemed to stretch into the sky. The courtroom, an enormous hall filled with beings of all shapes and sizes, was eerily silent. Every eye in the room was on her. She had been accused of violating an important intergalactic treaty, a treaty no human had ever seen or even heard of. The trial had been set up quickly, and the entire situation felt wrong. Emma, normally calm under pressure, could feel her nerves rising. Her stomach rumbled loudly, echoing in the quiet courtroom. At the center of it all sat Judge Vrokoff, the alien overseeing the trial. He was a large, intimidating creature with scales the color of deep stone. His long tail curled behind him as his glowing eyes watched Emma carefully. Vrokoff was known for being strict, cold, and unyielding. His species, the Vorketh, had been part of the Galactic Concord since its early days, and they had earned a reputation for their rigid interpretation of law. Emma knew that if she didn't handle this trial well, humanity's reputation could be severely damaged. The Galactic Council chamber was filled with representatives from all over the universe. Most of them were alien beings that looked nothing like humans. Many had strange features. Some had more than 2 arms or no faces at all, while others appeared like walking plants or animals. Emma's heart raced as she faced them, knowing that the stakes couldn't be higher. This trial wasn't just about her. It was about humanity's place in the future of the galaxy. The prosecution was a tall, sleek alien named Jorax, who had a smooth, silver-colored body. His voice was sharp and precise as he laid out the charges against Emma. He argued that Emma had interfered with a diplomatic mission by breaking the treaty between her people and the Zern, an ancient alien race that lived on a distant planet. He claimed that Emma had sabotaged a critical trade agreement, though he offered no solid evidence to back up this accusation. Emma's lawyer, a mild-mannered alien named Tolan, had tried to prepare a defense, but Emma knew it was going to be difficult. The treaty in question had been drafted centuries ago and was filled with vague, confusing terms that no one, human or alien, truly understood. It was the perfect weapon for the alien elites to use against a young species like humanity. As the trial continued, Emma struggled to focus. Her stomach had been growling since the moment she had entered the courtroom, and it was becoming increasingly hard to ignore. She had been so busy preparing for this moment that she had forgotten to eat. The last meal she had was a hurried breakfast hours ago, and now her body was demanding food. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, trying not to let it distract her. Finally, unable to ignore it any longer, Emma leaned over to her lawyer and whispered, "I'm starving." She wasn't trying to be dramatic. She really was hungry, and her mind couldn't focus properly with the growling in her stomach. But her words, though meant for Tolan, were picked up by the universal translator embedded in her collar, which broadcasted everything she said. The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Her statement had been translated into the native languages of every species present. The translator's voice echoed through the vast chamber. The human, Emma Carter, has stated that she is hungry. Emma's face flushed with embarrassment. She hadn't meant to disrupt the trial. She glanced at Tolan, who looked horrified by her outburst. The prosecution, Jorax's, was the first to respond. His face, though devoid of emotion, seemed to show a hint of amusement. "Is this a joke?" he asked in a voice that rang with mockery. "The accused is here for serious charges, and yet she complains of hunger like a child." The council members began to murmur among themselves. Some of the alien representatives laughed, while others frowned. Emma's stomach growled louder, making the situation even more awkward. She quickly covered her face with her hand, wishing she could disappear. Judge Vrokoth raised one large clawed hand, silencing the room. His deep voice boomed, cold and stern. "Human, you will not disrespect this court. Hunger has no place here." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had known Vrokoth was strict, but this... She felt a wave of frustration and humiliation wash over her. She wasn't trying to be disrespectful. She simply needed food to think clearly. She was human, after all, and humans needed food to survive and function properly. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain herself, but Vrokoth held up his hand again. "Enough," he said, his tone final. "You will remain silent. The tribunal will proceed as planned." Emma slumped in her seat, feeling helpless. She glanced at the others around her, but no one seemed to understand what it was like to be human, how important something as simple as food could be. The trial was turning into a nightmare, and she had no idea how to fix it. As the trial moved forward, Emma sat quietly, trying to ignore her hunger. She knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, she would have to fight, not just for herself, but for humanity's future among the stars. But deep down, Emma wondered, would anyone here ever understand what it meant to be human? The trial room was heavy with tension. Emma's stomach rumbled loudly again, breaking the silence. She tried to ignore it, but it was hard to concentrate with the constant reminder that she hadn't eaten all day. She shifted in her seat, doing her best to focus on the trial. Joraks, the prosecutor, had resumed speaking. His words were sharp and precise, but to Emma, they felt distant and irrelevant. The charges against her seemed like an old story that had no real connection to the present moment. How could anyone focus on a centuries-old treaty when their body was screaming for food? "Emma Carter," Joraks said with a sneer, "you have broken the laws of the Galactic Concord. You've endangered the delicate balance of our interstellar trade agreements." His voice echoed around the courtroom. "And now, instead of taking responsibility, you choose to distract us with trivial complaints." The room grew quieter. The alien delegates exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some seemed annoyed, while others appeared puzzled. Emma could feel their eyes on her, judging her, and the weight of it was unbearable. Vrokoth, the judge, leaned forward, his massive reptilian form casting a long shadow over the room. His cold, glowing eyes fixed on Emma. "Human," he said in his deep, rumbling voice, "this is not a joke. You have disrespected the proceedings. If you cannot remain focused, we will proceed without you." Emma's frustration boiled over. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. What could she say? That she was hungry and couldn't think straight. They wouldn't understand. They couldn't understand. "Your Honor," Tolan, her lawyer, spoke up, his voice gentle but firm. "My client is under a great deal of stress. The charges are unfounded, and the treaty in question is outdated. I urge the court to consider her condition. She is not used to this environment, and the pressures of the trial are overwhelming." Vrokoth's gaze shifted from Emma to Tolan. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it seemed like he might say something, but then he simply dismissed Tolan with a wave of his hand. "The law is the law. No one is above it, not even the humans." Tolan fell silent, clearly frustrated, but he didn't argue further. Emma could see the worry in his eyes. She knew he was trying his best, but the weight of the trial was far too heavy for someone who didn't understand humanity's true needs. The room seemed to close in on her. The alien faces around her looked so different, so cold and distant. She felt alone and hungry. In a moment of desperation, Emma turned to Tolan and whispered, "I need food. I can't focus. My mind is all over the place. Can't we at least get a break?" Tolan looked conflicted but nodded slightly. He knew she was right. The trial was dragging on, and she couldn't think properly when her body was demanding attention. Suddenly, Judge Vrokoth stood up, his sharp claws clicking against the stone floor as he moved. The room went silent. Everyone was watching him now, waiting for his next command. He was known for his strict, unwavering decisions, and no one knew what to expect next. Vrokoth turned his gaze to Emma, his glowing eyes almost glowing brighter. "This trial will not be interrupted further by trivial complaints," he said with authority. "However, I will allow a short recess." A murmur rippled through the room. A recess. That wasn't typical. Usually, the trials were long, drawn-out affairs with no breaks at all. Emma blinked in surprise. Was he actually giving her a break? It almost seemed like an act of mercy. The judge turned to his assistants. "Prepare something for the human," he ordered, his tone firm. "She needs food to focus. Make sure it is appropriate." The council members looked stunned, but no one dared challenge the judge. They nodded quickly, and a few attendants hurried out of the room. Emma wasn't sure if she should be relieved or confused. This wasn't something she had ever expected. An alien judge, one who had been so cold and unyielding, was ordering food for her. It felt strange, like she was in some kind of dream. A few minutes later, the attendants returned with a strange-looking tray. Emma's stomach growled even louder. The food wasn't anything like the meals she was used to. The dish was a weird mixture of colors and shapes, none of which looked familiar. It was a mix of strange, brightly colored fruits, strange proteins, and something that looked like a gelatinous liquid. Emma stared at it for a moment before realizing she didn't have much of a choice. She picked up a fork, hesitated, and took a bite. The texture was odd, and the taste was unlike anything she had ever had before. Some of it was sweet, some bitter, and other parts were oddly metallic. It wasn't exactly appetizing, but at least it was something. She swallowed it quickly and took another bite. Slowly, her hunger was starting to be satisfied, even if the food didn't taste quite right. Across the room, Vrokoth watched her closely, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he observed her reaction. His posture was stiff, but there was an unreadable expression on his face. He wasn't sure why he had ordered the food in the first place. His species didn't need food in the same way humans did. But something about Emma's determination, her simple request for food, had stirred something in him. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't beg for a break. All she had said was that she was hungry. And in that simple statement, she had shown a side of humanity that Vrokoth hadn't expected. Strength in the face of adversity, and a refusal to let anything stand in her way. He wasn't sure why it made him pause, but it did. He had seen countless species in his time, and none of them had handled pressure quite like this human girl. He had always believed that the strongest species were those who could endure without weakness, but now he was starting to wonder if humans were stronger for their vulnerability. The food, at least, seemed to do its job. Emma's mind was slowly becoming clearer, and she could focus again. She glanced at Judge Vrokoth and noticed that his expression had softened, though only slightly. He hadn't spoken a word, but there was something in the way he was looking at her now. Something different, but there was no time to dwell on it. The trial was far from over, and Emma knew that her fight for humanity's future had only just begun. The break was short, but Emma had used every moment to refuel. Her mind, now clearer after taking a few bites, was finally starting to catch up with the situation. She sat back in her seat, feeling the energy slowly return to her body. The food was strange, yes, but it worked. She could focus again. The growl of her stomach had stopped, at least for now. As the trial resumed, Emma tried her best to pay attention to the proceedings. She glanced around the room, noticing the different species once more. Some seemed to be whispering among themselves, likely discussing the unexpected turn of events. Others were simply watching, their alien eyes fixed on her with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Judge Vrokoth had not spoken a word since the recess, but his gaze remained on Emma, always steady, always calculating. Emma couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking. For the first time since the trial began, she felt like he wasn't just looking at her with disdain. There was something in his eyes, something that resembled understanding. Or was it simply curiosity? Her attention was pulled back to the front of the room as Vrokoth rose again, the room falling into a hushed silence. His massive form towered over everyone, and despite his alien appearance, his presence seemed to demand respect. "We will continue," Vrokoth's deep voice echoed through the chamber. "The human will speak in her defense, though I expect no further interruptions. If you have eaten, then you are ready." Emma nodded, though she still wasn't sure exactly what he meant by ready. The strange food had done its job, but the pressure of the trial weighed heavily on her shoulders. She glanced at Tolan, her lawyer, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. She could do this. She had to. The prosecution began again, Jorax stepping forward with a smug look on his face. "We have heard the human's complaints," he said with a hint of mockery. "But the facts are clear. The treaty is a binding agreement that the human has knowingly broken. And yet, she seeks sympathy for something as trivial as hunger." Emma bit her lip, trying to control her rising frustration. To Jorax, her hunger was just a distraction. But to her, it had been a reality that had almost cost her everything. She wasn't going to let him turn this into a joke. Not anymore. She stood up slowly, her eyes meeting Vrokoth's as she did. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next move. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she let the silence hang in the air, giving herself a moment to gather her thoughts. Finally, Emma spoke. Her voice was calm but firm, the words carefully chosen. "I did not come here to ask for sympathy. I came here to defend my people, to defend humanity's place in the galaxy. I did not break any law intentionally, nor did I ever intend to harm anyone." Her words were met with silence, but she could see the eyes of the council members beginning to shift. Some seemed to be considering her words, while others still looked at her with distrust. It wasn't much, but it was a small victory. Emma wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for fairness. "The treaty that I supposedly broke," she continued, "was written by species who are long gone. Its terms are outdated, and it fails to take into account the realities of a changing galaxy. I'm not here to debate ancient history. I'm here to talk about the future. A future where all species, including humanity, are treated equally." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed like nothing would happen. But then, to Emma's surprise, Vrokoth spoke. "Humanity does not understand our ways," Vrokoth's deep voice rumbled. "You come from a planet so young in comparison to ours. Your species is barely a child among the stars." And yet, his voice trailed off, and Emma felt her heart race. "And yet?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Vrokoth's eyes narrowed, but this time there was a flicker of something else in them. "And yet," he continued, "there is something in your spirit, something I did not expect from humans. It is different." Emma blinked. What did he mean? She couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a challenge, but either way, it caught her off guard. The room was still silent, everyone waiting for Vrokoth's next words. The judge turned to the council, his voice growing stronger. "Perhaps the humans are not as weak as some of you believe. Perhaps in their own way, they are strong." A murmur spread throughout the room. Some of the alien delegates were clearly taken aback, while others seemed to be intrigued by Vrokoth's words. Emma could hardly believe what she was hearing. Was this really happening? Before she could process it, the doors to the tribunal room suddenly opened. The attendants, who had left earlier, re-entered with another strange food cart. This time, however, it was different. The cart was stacked with various dishes, some more familiar, others still alien, but all appeared much more appetizing. "This," one of the attendants said, "is for the human. A feast to show goodwill." A feast? Emma could hardly believe her ears. Was this part of the trial? Or was this just another test? Either way, her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl, and the room erupted into a soft laughter, breaking the tension that had built up over the past few hours. Judge Vrokoth simply nodded, his sharp eyes glinting. "Let the human eat. It seems she has earned it. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. She was still in the middle of a trial. But in that moment, she wasn't just the accused. She was someone who had been heard, someone who had stood up for herself and her people. And now, she had a chance to show them all what humanity was truly capable of. As she began to eat, the eyes of the council were still on her, but Emma no longer felt like the outsider. She was human, and today, she had made them see that humanity was more than just a fleeting, insignificant species. She had taken her first step towards something greater. The feast was more than Emma could have ever imagined. The strange dishes, though unfamiliar, were surprisingly delicious. It was as if the court had understood her need for nourishment and had gone out of their way to offer her a variety of foods, some alien, some not, but all designed to satisfy the hunger that had once clouded her mind. As she ate, she felt her strength returning, and with it, a sense of clarity she had desperately needed. Around her, the room was still quiet, but the mood had shifted. The earlier tension had faded, replaced with an unusual sense of curiosity. The council members watched her eat with a kind of interest Emma hadn't seen before. It was as if they were finally seeing her as something more than just a human on trial. She was no longer the distracted, hungry diplomat. She was a person who had earned their respect. Emma glanced up at Judge Vrokoth, who had been watching her carefully. His expression was still stern, but there was something different in the way he regarded her now. He hadn't spoken since his earlier comment about humanity's strength, but his silence spoke volumes. Emma could feel his eyes on her, and though he had been the one to hold the power in the room, there was a shift in the balance now. She wasn't just a pawn in this trial. She was part of something bigger. The feast continued, and as Emma finished her meal, the attendants began clearing the dishes. The air was heavy with anticipation, but Emma was no longer overwhelmed. She had regained control of herself, and now it was time to focus on what really mattered: the future of humanity in the Galactic Concord. Judge Vrokoth, Emma said, her voice clear and steady. She stood up from her seat, feeling the weight of the moment. I did not break any law with ill intent. What I did was in the hope of creating a better future, not just for humanity, but for everyone in the galaxy. Vrokoth's eyes flicked toward her, his gaze piercing but not unkind. Explain yourself, human, he said, his tone neutral but curious. Emma took a deep breath and began to speak, choosing her words carefully. The treaty I'm accused of violating was written centuries ago. It was created at a time when the galaxy was a different place, when species were more isolated, when the balance of power was in favor of only a few. But now, the galaxy is changing. New species are joining the Galactic Concord, and humanity is one of them. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The treaty between the Zhurn and the humans is outdated. It was meant to protect the interests of a few, but it no longer reflects the reality of today's galaxy. We, as humans, have always fought for what's right, and we believe in equality for all species, not just the powerful ones. What I did was not an act of defiance. It was an act of survival. Humanity cannot continue to follow outdated agreements that do not serve the greater good. A murmur ran through the council. Some of the delegates were nodding, while others remained silent, their expressions unreadable. Emma didn't know if she had convinced them yet, but she felt like she had made a point that could not be ignored. She was no longer pleading for forgiveness. She was stating a fact, one that many of the council members were now beginning to understand. Vrokoth remained silent for a moment, and Emma could feel the weight of his gaze. His sharp eyes were calculating, and for a moment, she wondered if he would reject her plea entirely. But then, to her surprise, he spoke. The humans speak of equality, he said, his voice deep and thoughtful. But equality is a concept that many do not understand. The Zhurn were once powerful, and they wrote laws that benefited them. You ask for change, but not all species are willing to let go of what they've held for so long. Emma met his gaze. I understand that, she said softly. But change is inevitable. The galaxy is no longer the same as it was. If we want peace, if we want a future where all species can thrive, we must be willing to adapt. I'm asking for fairness, not just for humanity, but for everyone." There was a long pause. The silence in the room grew heavy, but Emma didn't back down. She had said what needed to be said. The future of humanity was at stake, and she wasn't going to let fear or doubt stop her now. Finally, Vrokov leaned back in his seat. His sharp claws clicked against the stone floor as he drummed them lightly, thinking. "You have made a compelling argument, human," he said slowly. "But words are not enough. Action must follow." Emma's heart raced. What did he mean? Was he testing her? Or was this simply another obstacle she had to overcome? "We will give you a chance," Vrokov continued, his voice resolute. "But your future in the Galactic Concord is not guaranteed. You must prove that humanity is capable of change. We will offer you an opportunity. A mission that will test your resolve, your ability to work with other species, and your understanding of what it means to coexist. If you succeed, you may have a place among the stars. If you fail, the consequences will be severe." Emma's mind raced. This was it, the chance she had been waiting for. A chance to prove humanity's worth. She had always believed in the potential of her people, and now she had to show the galaxy that humans could not only survive, but thrive in a universe filled with so many different species. "What is the mission?" she asked, her voice steady despite the excitement building inside her. Vrokov's eyes glinted. "You will travel to the Zhurn homeworld," he said. "You will negotiate with the Zhurn for a new treaty, one that is fair to all parties involved. You will have the chance to show them that humanity is more than capable of handling the responsibilities of the Galactic Concord. But remember, this mission will not be easy. The Zhurn are not known for their diplomacy." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. The Zhurn were a powerful, ancient species. Negotiating with them would be one of the most difficult tasks she could imagine. But this was her chance. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She would prove that humanity had a place in this galaxy. "I accept the mission," Emma said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." Vrokov nodded, his expression unreadable. "Very well. We will prepare the details. You leave at once." As Emma turned to leave, she felt a wave of determination wash over her. The trial had been hard, but now, a new path had opened before her. A path that would shape the future of humanity among the stars. The room grew quiet as the council's decision was made. Emma had agreed to the mission, to travel to the Zhurn homeworld and negotiate a new treaty. It was a monumental task, one that carried great risk. The Zhurn were a species known for their strength and ancient history. Diplomacy was not their strongest suit, and Emma knew that her journey would not be easy. As she left the tribunal room, the weight of the task began to settle on her shoulders. The halls of the Galactic Council building were vast, and the distant hum of alien voices filled the air. Despite the grandiosity of the building, Emma felt alone. She had never been this far from Earth. And now she was about to embark on a mission that could decide the future of humanity. Tolan, her lawyer, caught up with her as she walked. "Emma," he said, his voice filled with concern, "are you sure about this? The Zhurn, they're not like any species you've dealt with before. They don't negotiate. They conquer." Emma stopped and turned to face him. His concern was evident, but she couldn't afford to let fear take over. "I have to do this, Tolan. For humanity. We can't stay on the sidelines anymore. We need to show the galaxy that we can be a part of this larger community. If I don't try, then what's the point of all of this? What's the point of the trial?" Tolan hesitated but nodded slowly. "I understand, but be careful. The Zhurn don't take kindly to humans. You'll need more than words to convince them. I'll help you prepare, but you'll be on your own once you arrive. There's no telling what will happen." Emma gave him a reassuring smile. "I'll be fine. I'm not going to let humanity down." With that, she walked away, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. She knew the Zhurn weren't going to make things easy. They were known for their fierce loyalty to their traditions and their willingness to go to any lengths to protect their power. Emma's mission wasn't just about rewriting a treaty, it was about changing the way the galaxy saw humanity. As she made her way to the transport station, Emma couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. She had started as a simple human ambassador, sent to represent her people in a foreign galaxy. Now she was facing the greatest challenge of her life, to convince the Zhurn to agree to a new treaty, one that would not only benefit humanity, but also the other species who had suffered under the old laws. She had to make them see that the galaxy needed to change, that the old ways couldn't continue. The transport station was buzzing with activity, filled with delegates from all over the galaxy. Ships of various sizes and shapes hovered in the docking bays, ready to carry their passengers to distant worlds. Emma's ship was already waiting for her, a sleek vessel designed for fast travel across the stars. She boarded it alone, her heart pounding with anticipation. The journey to the Zhurn homeworld was long, but Emma tried to make use of the time. She spent hours studying the history of the Zhurn, learning about their culture, their leaders, and their relationship with the Galactic Concord. The more she read, the more she realized how difficult her mission would be. The Zhurn had little interest in diplomacy, and their previous treaties with other species were often one-sided, benefiting only the Zhurn. She also learned that the Zhurn had been at war with several other species in the past, and their military strength was unmatched. Convincing them to change their ways would be a monumental task. Emma couldn't help but wonder if she was even capable of doing it. But as she sat in the quiet of the ship, her thoughts turned back to the one thing that had kept her going throughout this entire ordeal: humanity's future. She couldn't let fear stop her now. She was the representative of her people, and she had to be strong, not just for herself, but for every human who dreamed of exploring the stars. Days passed, and eventually, the Zhurn homeworld came into view. It was a planet of red deserts and vast mountains, with cities built into the sides of cliffs. The Zhurn's home was as harsh and unforgiving as their people, and Emma knew that this would be the most difficult challenge she had ever faced. Her ship descended through the atmosphere, its hull shaking from the turbulence. As it touched down on the surface, Emma could see the Zhurn waiting for her. They were massive creatures, their bodies covered in thick, scaly armor, their eyes glowing with a fierce intelligence. They towered over her, their expressions unreadable as they observed her arrival. Emma stepped off the ship, feeling the weight of their gaze. She had read about the Zhurn's warrior culture, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer presence of these beings. They were intimidating, their muscular forms radiating power. Their leader, a towering figure named Xarthok, stepped forward to greet her. "You are the human who dares to speak of equality." Xarthok's voice was deep and resonant, and Emma could feel the power behind each word. Emma stood tall, trying to mask the nervousness that had settled in her chest. "I am Xarthok, and I've come to negotiate a new treaty, one that benefits all species, not just the Zhurn." Xarthok's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. "We have no need for your treaties, human. We are the strongest. We take what we want, when we want." Emma's heart raced, but she held her ground. "That's why I'm here. The galaxy is changing, and the old ways don't work anymore. The Zhurn may be the strongest, but there are more than just strength and power. There is diplomacy. There is cooperation. The future of the galaxy depends on it." Xarthok's eyes glowed with intensity, and Emma could feel the challenge in his gaze. This would be no easy task, but she couldn't back down. The future of humanity, and the galaxy, was on the line. The air on the Zhurn homeworld felt thick with tension as Emma faced Xarthok, the imposing leader of the Zhurn. His fierce gaze never left her, and his towering presence made Emma feel like a small, fragile being standing in the shadow of a giant. The Zhurn were not just physically powerful, they were proud, and that pride made them resistant to change. Convincing them to abandon their old ways would not be easy, and Emma could feel the weight of the task ahead. "You speak of cooperation," Karthok growled, his voice deep and heavy. "But you come from a species that has barely left its home planet. You are nothing compared to us. You think your words can change the course of the galaxy." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat, but kept her voice steady. "I may not have your strength, Karthok, but I believe that words have power. The strength of a species isn't just measured by how many battles it wins. It's measured by its ability to adapt, to work together for a common goal. Humanity has always fought for what's right. We're willing to change, to learn, and to build a better future for everyone in the galaxy." Karthok's piercing eyes narrowed as he studied her, weighing her words. Emma's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. She had come here for a reason, to prove that humanity wasn't just a race to be ignored, but a species with the potential to shape the future. "The Zhurn have no need for your cooperation," Karthok said, his voice filled with contempt. "Our power has kept us strong for centuries. We do not need the help of weaker species. We take what we want, and we crush those who stand in our way." Emma's mind raced. The Zhurn's pride and strength were undeniable, but they were also short-sighted. They saw the galaxy through the lens of their past victories, not understanding that the future would require more than just brute force. "That's exactly why we need change," Emma said, her voice growing more confident. "The old ways, the ways of taking and conquering, only lead to more conflict. If the Zhurn continue on this path, you will isolate yourselves from the rest of the galaxy. And eventually, you'll face a future where your strength won't be enough." Karthok's nostrils flared, but Emma pressed on. "Humanity has learned this the hard way. We've fought wars, lost lives, and seen the consequences of unchecked power. We've learned that peace isn't just about being the strongest. It's about understanding each other, respecting each other. That's why we need a new treaty, one that treats all species equally. No more dominance. No more oppression." For a long moment, Karthok stood silent, his eyes never leaving Emma. The tension between them was almost unbearable, and Emma could feel the weight of every second stretching out like an eternity. But she refused to look away. She was here for a reason, and she had to make him understand. Finally, Karthok spoke, his voice low and filled with a strange mix of amusement and respect. "You speak with conviction, human. I have met many species in my time, but none have dared to challenge us so directly. You are bold. I will give you that." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "I'm not challenging you, Karthok," she said carefully. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of something greater. The galaxy is changing, and if the Zhurn don't adapt, they will be left behind. But if you're willing to work with us, to treat all species as equals, then you can be part of a new era, one where strength isn't just measured in battles won, but in alliances forged." Karthok's gaze softened, but only slightly. He turned and gestured for Emma to follow him. She did, stepping cautiously as he led her through the towering structures of the Zhurn city. The architecture was impressive, made of black stone and sharp angles, designed to reflect the harshness of the environment. It was a world built on strength and survival, not on diplomacy or peace. "Your words may have power," Karthok said as they walked, "but words alone are not enough to change the minds of my people. If you want to prove yourself human, you must do more than speak. You must show us that humanity is capable of the strength you claim. Only then will the Zhurn consider your proposal." Emma stopped in her tracks, the weight of his words sinking in. "What do you mean?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. Karthok turned to face her, his eyes cold and calculating. "I will not make it easy for you. If you want the Zhurn to listen, you must prove your worth. You will face a trial, a test of your strength, your resolve, and your ability to survive in the harshest conditions. Only then will we consider your treaty." Emma's mind raced. A trial? What kind of trial? But she knew better than to show weakness. She couldn't afford to back down now. The future of humanity was at stake. "I accept your challenge," Emma said, her voice steady. "I will prove to you that humanity is worthy of your respect." Zarthok gave a small nod, as though he had expected her response. "Very well, human. The trial will begin tomorrow. Prepare yourself, for it will be unlike anything you have ever faced." With that, Zarthok turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing in the middle of the Zhurn city. She had no idea what awaited her in the trial, but she knew one thing for sure: she had to succeed. There was no turning back now. As Emma stood there, looking out over the vast desert landscape of the Zhurn homeworld, she realized that this was the moment. This was her chance to prove that humanity wasn't just a young species fighting for survival. They were a species with the power to shape the future, to bring change to a galaxy that had been stuck in the past for too long. But first, she had to survive the trial, and she had no idea what that would entail. The next morning, Emma stood at the entrance of a vast, unforgiving desert. The sun blazed high in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. There was no sign of life, just endless stretches of red sand and jagged rocks. This was the place Zarthok had chosen for her trial. Emma's heart raced as she glanced at the Zhurn warriors standing at the edge of the desert, watching her with cold, indifferent eyes. Zarthok appeared beside her, his massive figure blocking out the sun for a moment. "The trial will test your strength, endurance, and ability to survive in the harshest conditions," he said, his voice deep and unyielding. "You will have no weapons, no help. You will survive only with your wits and your willpower." Emma nodded, her mind already preparing for what lay ahead. She had faced adversity before, but this was different. The Zhurn were testing more than just her physical strength. They were testing her ability to adapt, to overcome the challenges of their world, and most importantly, to prove that humanity could thrive in a galaxy filled with dangers. Zarthok pointed toward the horizon. "Your goal is simple. Reach the Zhurn stronghold before nightfall. You have no map, no guide. You must navigate the desert and find your way. Along the way, you will face obstacles designed to break you. If you can reach the stronghold before sundown, you will have passed the trial." Emma looked out over the vast desert, feeling the weight of Zarthok's words. The task seemed impossible, but she knew she had no choice. She had come this far for humanity's future, and there was no turning back now. Taking a deep breath, she turned and began to walk, the heat of the desert already pressing down on her. The sun beat relentlessly on her back as she trudged through the sand, the dry air making each breath feel heavier than the last. She had no idea how far the stronghold was, but she knew that every step brought her closer to her goal. The Zhurn warriors behind her remained silent, watching her every move without a word of encouragement or doubt. They were testing her in the most unforgiving way possible, but Emma refused to show fear. She had faced tougher odds before. She could do this. Hours passed, and the landscape around her remained unchanged, just endless stretches of sand and rocks. Emma's legs began to ache, her throat dry and parched. The heat was unbearable, and the weight of the trial began to take its toll. But she kept moving, step by step, refusing to give in to the fatigue. As the day wore on, Emma's thoughts turned back to Earth. She remembered her family, her friends, and the life she had left behind. She had come here to represent humanity, to prove that her species was capable of surviving, of thriving in this strange galaxy. The trial wasn't just about her. It was about every human who dreamed of a future among the stars. She couldn't fail them. Not now. In the distance, Emma spotted something. A dark shadow against the bright sky. A rock formation. It wasn't much, but it was something. She stumbled toward it, hoping for some relief from the sun's unrelenting heat. As she got closer, she realized it was a cave, hidden beneath the rocks. She crawled inside, grateful for the shade and the coolness that greeted her. Her body ached, and she collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to collect her thoughts. She had to keep moving. The Zhurn wouldn't give up on the trial just because she found a brief moment of rest. She glanced at the sky. The sun was lower now. She didn't have much time. With renewed determination, Emma stood up and exited the cave. She had no choice but to keep pushing forward. As she continued her journey, the desert seemed to grow more hostile with every step. The sand dunes were higher, and the air was thick with dust. Her eyes stung from the dryness, but she refused to stop. She had learned long ago that survival wasn't just about physical strength. It was about mental toughness, too. She had to stay focused, to keep her mind sharp, or she would never make it. Hours later, Emma found herself at the base of a mountain range. She could see the dark silhouette of the Zhurn stronghold in the distance, but it was still far away, and the sun was beginning to set. She knew that time was running out. The climb up the rocky slopes was steep, and the air was thin, making each step more difficult than the last. Her body screamed for rest, but she ignored it, focusing only on the stronghold ahead. As she neared the top, a sudden gust of wind kicked up, sending sand and dust into her eyes. She shielded her face with her arm, her vision blurred. Then, a voice broke through the wind. Human. Tarthok's voice echoed through the desert. You've come far, but you are too late. Emma's heart sank. She couldn't stop now. She had come so far, and the stronghold was so close. She gritted her teeth and pushed herself harder, refusing to give up. She reached the summit, and there it was, the Zhurn stronghold. It was a fortress built into the side of the mountain, surrounded by walls of stone. The doors were massive, and Emma could hear the hum of activity within. She had made it. The trial was over. But just as she approached the gates, Tarthok appeared, his massive form blocking the entrance. You have failed, human, he said, his tone flat. You have not arrived before sundown. Emma stopped in her tracks, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had failed. She had given everything, and it still wasn't enough. But as she stood there, staring at the Zhurn leader, something shifted inside her. She may have failed the trial, but she had shown the Zhurn something they hadn't expected. A human who was willing to fight, to endure, to push past every limit. You may not have passed the trial, Tarthok said, his voice surprisingly soft. But you have proven something. You have proven that humanity is stronger than we thought. Emma looked up at him, her heart pounding. She hadn't won, but she had earned something far more important, respect. And that was all she needed to move forward. The future of humanity had just begun.